Emily Harper gripped the edge of her crisp white uniform, taking a deep breath as she stepped into the massive, echoing halls of Naval Hospital San Diego at 24. She had dreamed of this moment for years, her first real job as a registered nurse at one of the busiest military medical centers in the country. The fluorescent lights reflected off the polished floors, and the sterile smell of antiseptic hung in the air, making her nose wrinkle slightly. This was a world far different from her quiet Ohio hometown, where the most stressful part of her day had been juggling nursing school assignments. Her father, a retired Army medic who had spent decades on the battlefield saving lives, had always told her, "Emily, instincts save lives more than years of experience. Trust yourself." His voice echoed in her mind as she walked past the nurse's station, glancing at the buzzing monitors and clipboard-laden desks. She had read all the textbooks, practiced the procedures countless times in simulations, and even volunteered at local hospitals, but this was real life. Real lives hung in the balance here, and Emily could feel her stomach knotting with anticipation. She reached the nurse's station, clutching her badge tightly. Heads turned briefly, eyes scanning her up and down. She smiled politely at a few colleagues, but the whispers began almost immediately. "She's the new nurse," one senior nurse murmured to another, her voice low and dripping with skepticism. "Looks like she just graduated. Hope she can handle this place," a doctor added, barely concealing a smirk. Emily's shoulders stiffened. The room felt suddenly colder, as though her very presence was being tested. She reminded herself not to shrink, not to let the doubt of others define her abilities. "I'm here for a reason," she thought. One belong here. Her first assignment was to shadow Nurse Ramirez, a seasoned professional with over 20 years of experience in trauma care. Emily followed her closely, absorbing every movement, every decision. She watched as Ramirez coordinated the team with a calm authority that came only from years of experience. Emily's eyes were wide, taking in the organized chaos of the AA patients arriving on stretchers, monitors beeping in rapid succession, and doctors issuing commands that Emily sometimes struggled to keep up with. By mid-morning, Emily had begun to find a rhythm checking vitals, labeling specimens, and assisting where she could. She had just finished charting the latest vitals of a recovering patient when an urgent alarm blared across the hospital, jolting everyone into action. The piercing sound of the emergency alert made her heart leap. Within seconds, medics rushed in carrying Commander Jason Hawk Riley, a Navy SEAL who had been severely injured during a training exercise. His uniform was torn and bloodied, and his breathing was shallow and uneven. His body bore the brutal marks of combat-level injuries, bruises, lacerations, and a pallor that spoke of blood loss. Doctors immediately sprang into motion, barking orders to the nurses, directing medics, and preparing the trauma room. Emily felt her pulse skyrocket as she followed instructions, helping stabilize equipment and pass instruments. But as she leaned closer to observe the commander's vitals, she noticed something unusual, subtle irregularities in his blood pressure and heart rate that hinted at internal bleeding. Her mind raced, analyzing the situation. For a fleeting moment, she felt invisible among the whirlwind of experienced staff. They didn't see her, or perhaps they didn't believe she had the expertise to matter. The whispers from earlier echoed in her ears, and she felt the familiar sting of doubt, but then she remembered her father's words. "Trust yourself." Emily's fingers tightened around the edge of the stretcher as she prepared to speak up. She didn't yet know that this moment would test everything she had learned. In just a few minutes, her instincts, her courage, and her knowledge would be put to the ultimate test when one of the military's finest men, a decorated SEAL commander, would arrive on the brink of death. As the trauma room doors slammed shut behind the rushing team, Emily took a steadying breath and reminded herself she might be the new nurse, but she was ready to prove that she belonged in this high-stakes world of life and death. The trauma room was a whirlwind of motion and sound. Monitors beeped incessantly, warning lights flashed, and the air was thick with the urgency of life-and-death decisions. Emily Harper felt her heart hammer in her chest as she followed the experienced nurses and doctors, trying to anticipate their needs. Every second mattered. Every movement could tip the balance between survival and catastrophe. Commander Jason Hawk Riley lay on the gurney, pale and barely conscious, his breathing ragged and uneven. His injuries were severe: a shattered shoulder, multiple lacerations across his torso, and internal bleeding that threatened to spiral into shock at any moment. Emily's stomach clenched at the sight. She had read about battlefield injuries in textbooks and simulations, but seeing them in real life, a living, breathing person in pain, was something entirely different. The senior doctors immediately took control, barking orders and positioning equipment. Emily's first instinct was to assist where she could. She handed over instruments, checked 4 lines, and monitored the commander's vitals. But as she observed, something caught her eye: the subtle dip in his blood pressure after each shallow breath. The slight irregularity in his pulse, the way his skin had a faint bluish tinge near his fingertips. "Doctor," Emily called, her voice steady but careful, "his blood pressure is dropping faster than the monitors indicate. Could there be internal hemorrhaging we're missing?" A ripple of disbelief went through the room. One of the older surgeons, Dr. Caldwell, raised an eyebrow, his tone tinged with amusement. "And you are?" he asked, a smirk tugging at the corner of his mouth. "Emily Harper," she said, holding his gaze. "I'm the new nurse, but I've been trained to identify these signs. I think if we stabilize his femoral artery first, we can prevent shock." A few snickers echoed from the corners of the room. Some doctors muttered under their breath, shaking their heads at what they considered audacity. Emily felt a brief sting of doubt, a familiar pang when her abilities were questioned. But she quickly pushed it aside. "Trust yourself," her father's words rang in her ears. She knew that hesitation could cost the commander his life. Dr. Caldwell glanced at her again, this time with a flicker of recognition in his eyes. He paused, weighing the risk of listening to the new nurse. After a tense moment, he nodded curtly. "Prepare him for stabilization. Nurse Harper, assist with the prep." Emily's pulse quickened, but not with fear, with focus. She moved with precision, calling out vital signs, passing instruments, and coordinating with other nurses. The room buzzed with skepticism, but Emily ignored the whispers, focusing solely on saving the commander's life. She felt a strange clarity in the chaos, a rhythm that only appeared in moments of true crisis. As she worked, her thoughts briefly flickered to her father, imagining his calm presence in the same scenario. "This is my moment, just like you always said it could be," she told herself silently. Minutes felt like hours. Every beep of the monitor, every glance at the commander's shallow breathing weighed on her. Emily guided the team through preparation for the intervention, ensuring everything was sterile, everything precise. The older nurses occasionally exchanged glances, part skepticism, part surprise, as they realized her confidence wasn't reckless. Finally, Dr. Caldwell gave the nod to begin the procedure. Emily's hands moved almost instinctively, steadying the commander's leg and assisting with the delicate steps required to stabilize the femoral artery. Her focus never wavered, her mind fully engaged in the life-or-death task before her. For the first time that day, the room felt quieter, not silent, but as though the chaos had dimmed to a background hum, allowing Emily's confidence and skill to guide the team. Even the doubting doctors began to notice. The new nurse, who had walked in timidly that morning, was now a linchpin in a high-pressure operation. As the procedure began, Emily caught the first flicker of improvement in the commander's vitals. His blood pressure stabilized slightly, his pulse strengthened, and for the first time since arriving, Emily allowed herself the smallest, controlled breath of relief. She wasn't done yet, far from it, but she had taken the first step in proving that she belonged in this world of seasoned doctors and battlefield trauma. And somewhere, deep in the commander's partially conscious eyes, there was a flicker of awareness, a silent acknowledgement that someone new, someone unexpected, was fighting for him with every ounce of skill she possessed. The trauma room had descended into a storm of controlled chaos. Alarms blared incessantly, fluorescent lights reflected sharply off the metal instruments, and the air smelled of antiseptic and blood. Emily Harper's heart pounded in her chest as she moved from one task to the next, feeling simultaneously invisible and indispensable. Every second mattered. Every movement counted. Commander Jason "Hawk" Riley lay on the gurney, his body battered from the training accident. His shoulder hung at an unnatural angle, and deep lacerations across his chest had already been stitched, but internal bleeding threatened to undo all progress. He was barely conscious, eyes fluttering under the harsh lights. Emily's fingers hovered over the monitor, her eyes narrowing as she analyzed the numbers. "His pressure is dropping again," she called out, her voice clear and firm, cutting through the cacophony. "We need to check for internal hemorrhaging. He could go into shock any second." The attending surgeon, Dr. Caldwell, who had reluctantly allowed her to assist earlier, shot her a skeptical look. "You're new," he said sharply. "We know what we're doing. Step back." Emily felt the familiar sting of doubt but refused to retreat. She knew the signs, knew the readings, and more importantly, knew that hesitation could cost the commander his life. "With all due respect, doctor, if we don't stabilize the artery now, he might not make it to surgery," she insisted, her voice steady despite the adrenaline surging through her veins. The room fell into a tense silence. Some of the doctors exchanged uneasy glances, realizing that the young nurse had identified a critical complication they had overlooked. For a moment, Emily's breath caught. This was a pivotal test, one she could not fail. "Fine," Dr. Caldwell said finally, gritting his teeth. "Prepare him for immediate intervention? Nurse Harper, take charge of prep?" Emily's heart surged. She moved with precision, coordinating the nurses, sterilizing instruments, and preparing the emergency supplies. Every motion was deliberate, practiced, but under the intense pressure of a real-life situation that no textbook or simulation could replicate. She felt a strange calm wash over her amidst the chaos, as though the universe had narrowed down to a single, critical focus: save this man's life. The other nurses watched in surprise. They had expected uncertainty, hesitation, or even panic from the new nurse, but Emily's confidence was unwavering. She double-checked the monitors, verified the IV lines, and guided the team as they prepped for stabilization of the femoral artery. As the procedure began, Emily's mind remained laser-focused. She assisted with each step, ensuring precision under pressure. Every beep of the monitor, every drop in the commander's vitals, sent adrenaline coursing through her veins, sharpening her instincts. She called out each observation calmly, coordinating with the surgeon and the assisting nurses. The doctors who had laughed earlier could no longer conceal their surprise. Emily's quick thinking and steady hands were holding the room together. Even Dr. Caldwell, whose skepticism had been palpable, began to nod subtly at her instructions, realizing that the new nurse was not only competent but essential. Minutes felt like hours. Emily's eyes darted between monitors, the commander's injuries, and the team around her. She could see the faint improvement in his vitals, a small but critical rise in blood pressure, a strengthening pulse. Every second of her careful attention was making a difference. Somewhere amidst the chaos, she noticed the commander's eyes flicker. Though he was barely conscious, there was awareness, a silent acknowledgement that someone new, someone unexpected, was fighting for him with unwavering determination. Emily allowed herself a brief, controlled breath, the first hint of relief breaking through her focus. But there was no time to linger. The battle to stabilize the SEAL commander was far from over. Emily's skills, courage, and ability to trust her instincts would be tested again in the moments to come. She understood that in this high-stakes world of military medicine, mistakes could not be afforded, and her actions in these critical minutes could define her career and save a life that mattered more than any she had ever treated before. Amid the tension, Emily felt a quiet, fierce determination ignite within her. She had been doubted, laughed at, and dismissed, but now, in the eye of the storm, she had the chance to prove that being new didn't mean being unworthy. That courage and skill could emerge from the most unexpected places. And as she prepared for the next phase of intervention, she realized one undeniable truth: this was her moment, and she was ready to rise to it. The trauma room felt like a battlefield. Monitors shrieked warnings, the scent of antiseptic mingled with the faint copper tongue of blood, and every second seemed to stretch into an eternity. Commander Jason Hawk Riley lay on the gurney, pale and trembling, his body battered from the accident. His breathing was shallow, and the faint tremors in his hands betrayed both pain and fear. Emily Harper's eyes flicked between his vitals and the medical team. Something didn't sit right. Despite the doctor's focus on stabilizing visible injuries, she noticed the subtle signs of internal bleeding that had begun to worsen, drops in blood pressure that were masked by the chaotic flurry of motion, irregular pulses that the others were overlooking. "Doctor," Emily said, her voice firm despite the nervous knot in her stomach, "we need to stabilize the femoral artery immediately. If we don't, he could go into shock before surgery." Dr. Caldwell, the attending surgeon, froze mid-command, his brows furrowed. "You're the new nurse," he said sharply, tone heavy with skepticism. "We've handled far worse. Step back." Emily's jaw tightened, but she didn't retreat. The whispers and smirks from the earlier chaos echoed in her ears, doubting, mocking, underestimating her. She reminded herself of her father's advice. Courage is not the absence of fear. It's acting despite it. She took a steadying breath, her fingers brushing against the sterile instruments. "With all due respect, Doctor," she said, voice unwavering, "I've seen this pattern before in training simulations and in field research. If we wait, he may not survive the transfer to surgery?" A murmur rippled through the room. Some nurses exchanged shocked glances, and even a few doctors paused, their expressions flickering between disbelief and curiosity. Emily felt the weight of judgment pressing down on her, but she refused to let it shake her. Her focus was absolute. Save this man. Dr. Caldwell's eyes narrowed. He studied her for a long moment, weighing the risk of letting a new nurse take the lead. Then, finally, he nodded, barely audible. "Prepare him. Nurse Harper, take charge of prep." Relief surged through Emily, but it was immediately replaced by intense concentration. She moved with precision, issuing calm, clear instructions as she sterilized instruments and coordinated the team. Every motion had to be perfect. Every second mattered. The room that had been filled with whispers of doubt now buzzed with cautious anticipation. Emily's hands worked with surgical precision, guiding the team to secure lines, check monitors, and stabilize the commander's leg. She stayed calm, even as adrenaline coursed through her veins, her mind fully engaged in every detail. She noticed a tiny drop in the commander's oxygen saturation and immediately adjusted the mask, keeping the airflow steady. "Pressure's dropping again," she said, pointing to the monitor. "We need a controlled transfusion now, or he could go into shock in less than 5 minutes." Dr. Caldwell hesitated, then barked the orders. Emily moved swiftly, preparing the transfusion kit, ensuring the blood matched perfectly, and guiding the nurses in administering it with precise timing. Each step was crucial. A misstep could undo all their progress. As the minutes passed, the commander's vitals began to stabilize, slowly, almost imperceptibly at first. Emily's eyes remained locked on the monitors, her heart pounding, yet a quiet determination filled her. She felt a surge of confidence. Her instincts had been right. And now she was guiding the team through this high-stakes procedure. For the first time that day, some of the senior staff leaned forward, watching her in awe. The new nurse, who had been laughed at and dismissed, was now the linchpin of a critical intervention. Emily ignored the disbelief in their eyes. Her focus was on the man on the gurney, fighting for his life. Somewhere deep within the commander's half-conscious gaze, there was recognition, a silent awareness that someone new, someone underestimated, was holding his life in their hands. Emily felt a strange mix of fear, exhilaration, and purpose. She knew the next few minutes could define not only the commander's survival, but also her future as a nurse in this high-stakes environment. And as she prepared for the next phase, the delicate steps to fully stabilize the femoral artery, Emily whispered to herself, a silent vow, "I will not fail him." Not now, not ever. The room, once chaotic and doubtful, now seemed to revolve around her steady presence. In the eye of the storm, Emily Harper had become the calm, uncheckable center, the unexpected force holding life itself in balance. Time seemed to stretch endlessly in the trauma room. Emily Harper's hands moved with precision, each motion deliberate, every instruction calm but authoritative. The monitors blared warnings and beeped irregularly, echoing the tension in the room, but Emily's focus never wavered. Commander Jason Hawk Riley lay on the gurney, pale and trembling, his eyes half closed, yet following the flurry of activity around him with faint recognition. Minutes earlier, Emily had taken a stand when others doubted her instincts, insisting that the internal bleeding needed immediate attention. Now, under her steady guidance, the femoral artery was being carefully stabilized, the delicate procedure requiring perfect timing and coordination. Nurses followed her instructions efficiently, and even the skeptical doctors watched closely, their disbelief slowly transforming into awe. "His pressure is rising slightly," Emily called out, eyes scanning the monitors. "Keep monitoring. Adjust the transfusion rate by 2 milliliters per minute. He's responding." A quiet ripple of surprise passed through the room. Dr. Caldwell, who had scoffed at Emily just hours earlier, leaned forward, his lips pressed together. He didn't speak, but his eyes betrayed the growing respect. Even the other nurses, some of whom had exchanged doubtful glances when she first arrived, began to mirror her calm precision, following her lead without question. The commander's pulse, once weak and irregular, began to strengthen. His blood pressure stabilized, the oxygen saturation rising to safer levels. Emily's mind raced with calculations, ensuring every intervention remained synchronized, every line secure. The life of one of the Navy's finest men rested in her hands, and she refused to falter. At that moment, a subtle shift occurred in the trauma room. The skepticism and whispers that had surrounded Emily dissipated, replaced by quiet respect. She wasn't just a new nurse anymore. She had become the center of control in a room of seasoned professionals. For the first time that day, Commander Riley's eyes fluttered open fully. Though weak, his gaze found Emily's, and in that brief, fleeting moment, a silent communication passed between them. Gratitude, recognition, trust. Emily allowed herself the smallest, controlled exhale, knowing she had bought him the precious time needed to stabilize him fully. She adjusted his checked the bandages, and gave clear instructions for the post-intervention monitoring. "Keep him warm," she directed, her voice calm but firm. "We need to maintain blood pressure and prevent shock. Nurse Ramirez, continue with vitals every 2 minutes. Dr. Caldwell, prepare for possible surgery in the next hour." Even in the midst of intense action, Emily noticed something remarkable. The doubting doctors were no longer dismissive. Instead, they were listening, learning, and following her guidance. Emily's courage had not only saved a life, but had altered the dynamic of the entire trauma team. Minutes later, the commander's vital signs began to show significant improvement. The monitors beeped steadily, warning lights dimmed, and the tension in the room eased slightly. Emily's hands, still steady, guided the team through final stabilization steps. She felt a strange surge of pride and relief, tempered by the knowledge that this was far from over. Commander Riley still required surgery and close monitoring, but the immediate crisis had been averted, and it had been her instincts and decisive action that had turned the tide. As she stepped back briefly, taking a moment to check the commander's expression, she saw the faintest hint of a smile on his lips. It was brief, almost imperceptible, but it carried weight, an acknowledgement of her skill, her bravery, and the critical role she had played. Emily's heart swelled with quiet satisfaction. She had faced skepticism, pressure, and doubt, yet had emerged as a steady hand in a storm of chaos. For the first time, the label "new nurse" felt irrelevant. She had proven, not just to the doctors and nurses around her, but to herself, that courage, skill, and determination could overcome inexperience, and that even in the most extreme circumstances, one person's resolve could make all the difference. Somewhere deep in the commander's half-conscious eyes, she glimpsed something extraordinary: trust. And in that trust lay the unspoken truth. Emily Harper was no longer just a new nurse. She was a force to be reckoned with, a guardian in scrubs, capable of turning impossible odds into hope. The trauma room, once a whirlwind of alarms and frantic movement, had settled into an almost surreal quiet. The monitors beeped steadily, a gentle reassurance that Commander Jason Hawk Riley's vital signs were finally stabilizing. Emily Harper stood by the gurney, her hands still steady, her eyes carefully scanning every monitor, every line, every tiny change in his condition. The adrenaline that had surged through her veins all morning was finally giving way to an exhausted but profound relief. She had saved his life, for now. But as she glanced at the faces of the senior doctors and nurses around her, Emily noticed something she hadn't expected: respect. The whispers of doubt that had followed her since she walked in that morning were gone. In their place were quiet murmurs of astonishment and admiration. Even Dr. Caldwell, the attending surgeon who had openly doubted her, was observing her with something that almost resembled reverence. Commander Riley's eyes fluttered open fully, the first time he had done so in hours. They were sharp, intense, the kind of eyes that had seen more war than most people could imagine. He was pale, weak, and in pain, but his awareness was returning, and with it a remarkable clarity. Emily leaned closer, checking his for and ensuring that all vital signs remained stable. The room held its collective breath. Then, with a slight tremor, Riley raised a hand. His body shook, but the gesture was unmistakable. He brought his hand to his forehead in a military salute, the highest form of respect in the armed forces, a gesture reserved for those who had earned it through courage, skill, or unwavering dedication. Emily froze for a heartbeat, stunned. The command room fell silent. The doctors and nurses, many of whom had laughed at her only hours before, watched in awe. The room seemed to hold its breath along with her. The salute was not just a courtesy, it was a statement, a recognition of her bravery, her skill, and her composure under pressure. Tears threatened to blur Emily's vision, but she blinked them back, maintaining her professional composure. "Commander, you're stable now," she said softly, her voice steady despite the emotional weight of the moment. "We're going to keep monitoring you closely. But you're going to be okay." Riley's lips curled slightly into a faint smile. And for the first time he spoke, his voice low but filled with authority. "Nurse Harper, you saved my life. Thank you." The words sent a ripple through the room. Doctors who had doubted her skills exchanged glances, silent acknowledgement of a reality they could no longer ignore. Nurses who had whispered behind her back now nodded, some smiling, recognizing that Emily's determination and instincts had made the difference between life and death. Emily felt an overwhelming mixture of relief, pride, and humility. The morning's doubts, the laughter, and the skepticism seemed almost like a distant memory. She had walked into the hospital that day as a new nurse, underestimated and dismissed, and now she stood as the woman who had saved the life of one of the Navy's most decorated SEALs. Dr. Caldwell finally broke the silence, his voice quiet but firm. "Nurse Harper, you did exceptional work today." For a moment, Emily saw the respect in his eyes, the kind of respect earned only when someone proves themselves under extreme pressure. Emily's mind briefly replayed the day, the chaos, the doubts, the adrenaline, the critical decisions. She thought of her father's words once more. Courage is acting despite fear. Today, she had not only acted, she had succeeded. Commander Riley's salute remained, subtle but unwavering. It was a moment that would remain etched in Emily's memory forever. In that silent, powerful gesture, she felt the acknowledgement of her skill, courage, and heart. She realized that in this world of high stakes and split-second decisions, respect was earned not by titles or experience, but by decisive action, unwavering focus, and the willingness to trust oneself when it mattered most. As Emily adjusted the commander's blanket and checked his vitals one last time before stepping back, she allowed herself a small, private smile. The room was no longer a place of doubt. It was a place of recognition, of earned respect. And in that moment, Emily Harper understood something profound. She had not only saved a life, she had proven that courage and determination could turn the tide, even in the face of skepticism and ridicule. The salute lingered in the air, a quiet but powerful testament to her journey, from the new nurse everyone had laughed at, to the guardian who had earned the admiration of one of the most formidable men in the Navy. The trauma room was quieter now, but Emily Harper could feel the lingering energy of what had just occurred. Commander Jason "Hawk" Riley was stable, and the gravity of the morning's events had begun to sink in among the staff. For Emily, the adrenaline had faded, leaving behind a deep exhaustion mixed with pride. She had faced doubt, scorn, and ridicule, and emerged not just unshaken, but victorious. In the days that followed, the hospital felt different. The whispers and glances that had accompanied her every step during her first week were gone, replaced by cautious acknowledgement. Nurses and junior doctors began seeking her advice during procedures, curious about the calm, precise way she handled high-pressure situations. The senior staff, once skeptical of her abilities, observed her quietly, often silently approving of her decisions before offering their own guidance. Emily remained humble, focusing on her work rather than the growing respect around her. She assisted in every critical case she could, always precise, always calm. When a soldier came in with a severe leg fracture, she calmly guided the team in prepping the patient for surgery, anticipating potential complications before they arose. When a young nurse hesitated during a routine procedure, Emily stepped in, gently demonstrating the correct technique, her patience unwavering. But not everyone was quick to change. A few of the older doctors and nurses still tested her, questioning her decisions in meetings or subtly criticizing her in hallways. Emily learned to navigate these challenges with grace. She didn't argue. She didn't retaliate. Instead, she let her work speak for itself. Every correct decision, every calm intervention under pressure slowly turned skeptics into allies. The turning point came during a particularly difficult case. A Marine was rushed in after a severe training accident, his vitals unstable, his injuries complicated. The attending physician debated multiple courses of action, and the room teetered on the edge of chaos. Emily stepped forward quietly, analyzing the monitors, the patient's history, and the treatment options. "Doctor," she said, her voice firm but respectful, "if we stabilize the internal bleeding first, we can prevent cardiac arrest. I've seen a similar case respond well with this method." The attending doctor paused, his gaze narrowing, but then he nodded. "All right." Nurse Harper, lead the prep. Emily's instructions were precise, her movements calm and measured. The team followed her seamlessly, trusting her expertise. The patient stabilized under her guidance, his vitals improving steadily. The doctors who had once doubted her now watched with visible respect. Emily didn't celebrate. She simply ensured the patient was safe, her humility as remarkable as her skill. Word of her actions spread quickly through the hospital. Staff began to view Emily not as a newcomer, but as a capable, reliable, and courageous nurse who could be counted on in the most critical situations. She became a mentor to other new nurses, sharing her knowledge and experience, encouraging them to trust their instincts, and demonstrating that confidence was earned through preparation, courage, and diligence. Even Commander Riley, now fully recovered, requested her assistance during his follow-up treatments. He would joke quietly in the rehabilitation room, "I trust you more than anyone else here. You might have saved my life, but now you're showing the others how it's done." Emily smiled, but inside she felt a quiet satisfaction. It wasn't about recognition, it was about proving to herself and others that courage and skill could transcend age and experience. Months passed, and Emily's presence became a stabilizing force within the hospital. She had turned skepticism into trust, ridicule into admiration, and doubt into unwavering confidence. Her journey from a new nurse laughed at by colleagues to a respected, indispensable member of the team inspired others quietly, proving that determination, focus, and courage could overcome even the harshest obstacles. Emily Harper had earned her place, not through titles, not through seniority, but through her actions, her unwavering focus, and her unshakable belief in herself. She had not only saved a life, but she had also proven something far more enduring, that respect and trust are earned through courage, competence, and the quiet strength to stand firm when it matters most. Months had passed since that chaotic morning when Emily Harper had first stepped into the trauma room as a nervous, new nurse. The memory of Commander Jason "Hawk" Riley's arrival, his life hanging by a thread, and the doubts that had followed her every step were still vivid in her mind. But now, as she walked through the bright halls of Naval Hospital San Diego, She carried herself with quiet confidence, the kind that comes from experience earned in the most extreme circumstances. The hospital had changed too. Emily's colleagues now approached her with respect, some with admiration. Nurses sought her guidance during difficult procedures, and junior doctors watched her calmly navigate crises, learning not just the techniques, but the courage and composure she exhibited under pressure. Even some of the senior staff who had once doubted her had quietly acknowledged her expertise, often deferring to her judgment during complex cases. Emily's impact went beyond skills and knowledge. She had become a mentor, a source of inspiration for new nurses entering a high-pressure environment where mistakes could be fatal and skepticism was often the first response to youth and inexperience. She encouraged them to trust their instincts, to speak up when they saw danger, and to remain calm amidst chaos. Her story had begun to ripple quietly through the hospital, becoming a lesson in resilience, courage, and the value of self-belief. One afternoon, Emily found herself walking into the rehabilitation room where Commander Riley was undergoing therapy after his full recovery. He looked up from his exercises and offered a faint smile. "You're late, Harper," he joked lightly, a twinkle in his eye. "I was starting to think the new nurse had vanished." Emily laughed softly, adjusting her scrubs. "I've been busy saving lives," she said, teasing, though her eyes reflected a deeper satisfaction. Riley's expression softened, his tone serious. "You know, you did more than save my life. You earned my respect, my trust, when others doubted you. That doesn't happen often. Most people never see what it takes to stay calm when the stakes are this high. But you proved it." Emily felt a swell of quiet pride. She had not sought recognition or accolades, but acknowledgement from someone of Riley's caliber, someone who had faced life-and-death situations countless times, carried immense weight. Later that week, during a hospital ceremony honoring staff for exceptional service, Riley stepped forward to speak publicly. The room was filled with doctors, nurses, and hospital administrators, many of whom had been skeptical of Emily when she first arrived. "Today," Riley began, his voice steady and commanding, "I want to recognize someone extraordinary. A nurse who, when faced with a life-or-death crisis, acted with courage, precision, and unwavering focus. Someone who reminded us all that skill, determination, and heart matter more than years of experience. Nurse Emily Harper, thank you for saving my life, and for showing all of us what true dedication looks like." Applause filled the room, echoing off the high ceilings. Emily felt her cheeks flush as she rose to accept the recognition. She offered a quiet nod of thanks, her heart full but her demeanor modest. This moment was not about her pride. It was about the journey, the lives touched, the lessons learned, and the trust earned through courage under pressure. That evening, Emily reflected on the path she had traveled. From the whispers of doubt and ridicule on her first day, to the chaos of the trauma room, to earning the salute of a decorated Navy SEAL, she had grown not just as a nurse, but as a person. She realized that courage was not the absence of fear, but the determination to act despite it. Respect was not demanded, but earned. And true strength was measured not in titles or seniority, but in the ability to make a difference when it mattered most. Emily Harper had started as the new nurse everyone laughed at, but she had become something far more enduring, a guardian, a mentor, and an inspiration. Her story became a quiet legacy in the halls of Naval Hospital San Diego, a testament to what one determined, courageous individual could achieve when they trusted their skills, their instincts, and themselves. As she looked out over the hospital grounds that evening, the golden light of sunset casting long shadows across the pavement, Emily smiled to herself. Her journey was far from over, but she had proven one undeniable truth. Heroes sometimes come in scrubs, and the courage to act can change everything.